Welcome to Whispers in the Dark. Tonight, prepare yourself for a chilling tale that will haunt your every step. As the clock strikes midnight, a team of investigators faces the unimaginable. A cursed house where the dead are not gone, they are waiting. Ghosts, demons, and a deadly frequency that lures the living into its grip. Can they escape? Or will they become part of its eternal nightmare? The shocking truth awaits at the end. Don't miss it. Make sure to subscribe to Whispers in the Dark to support us and stay tuned for more spine-tingling stories. The small town of Hollow Creek nestled quietly at the foot of the Appalachian Mountains, a place where the air was thick with ancient secrets and the weight of forgotten stories. Surrounded by dense, whispering forests and jagged hills that seemed to watch from above, Hollow Creek was a town frozen in time, both physically and spiritually. It was a town people moved away from, or more often, never returned to. Stories of its past were passed down through generations, growing more twisted with each telling, until they had become little more than ghostly tales, more myth than fact. But there was one story that even the oldest residents would refuse to speak of: the Hollow Creek house. It sat atop a hill, its silhouette looming dark and oppressive, shrouded in mystery and fear. Abandoned for decades, it had become a place of whispered warnings and uneasy glances. A house that had claimed the lives of several residents over the years, each death unexplained, each one leaving behind only a shroud of terror. The house had a reputation that reached far beyond Hollow Creek. Local folklore claimed that the land was cursed, a place where the dead didn't rest, but instead wandered through the walls of the decaying manor, trapped in eternal torment. Those who ventured too close spoke of strange, eerie phenomena: unexplained lights flickering in the windows, shadowy figures moving behind the curtains, and an unexplainable, ever-present hum in the air, like a frequency that the human ear wasn't meant to hear. But the most terrifying of all was the phenomenon no one could explain: the frequency. The unsettling hum that had plagued the house for decades. It wasn't just a sound. It was something deeper, something more sinister. The locals claimed that those who stayed too long in the house would hear the frequency grow louder, until it consumed them entirely, driving them mad or worse, turning them into the next ghost haunting the walls. It was this very mystery that had drawn Alex and Sam to the investigation. Both were no strangers to the paranormal. Alex, a driven journalist with a taste for the eerie and unknown, had always been fascinated by ghost stories. Sam, his childhood friend, was more practical but had long been intrigued by the psychological effects of fear. When the call came from the paranormal investigation team asking them to join the investigation, they both felt it was an opportunity they couldn't pass up. Alex was the more daring of the two, always seeking the edge of danger, drawn to the unknown with an almost obsessive fervor. He had spent years writing articles about the strange and bizarre, delving into the dark corners of the supernatural. But this was different. This wasn't just another haunted house. This place was infamous. It had a reputation of driving people to madness, of claiming lives. And for Alex, that made it the perfect story. Sam, on the other hand, was a skeptic. She believed in science, in logic, in explanations. She wasn't one to jump into the supernatural without hard evidence. But something about Alex's enthusiasm, combined with her own curiosity about the psychological toll the unknown could take, drove her to join the investigation. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew it would be a challenge. Alongside them was Ben, the tech expert, A no-nonsense analytical thinker, Ben was all about equipment. Cameras, sensors, thermometers, anything that could capture the truth if there was one to be found. His skepticism ran deep, and he believed that most paranormal phenomena could be explained by natural causes, like electrical disturbances, temperature fluctuations, or simply the power of suggestion. Still, he was willing to put the house to the test. The idea of using his technology to debunk the myths was too tempting. Finally, there was Mia, the psychic. She had been invited by the team for her ability to sense things that others couldn't. She didn't speak much about how she came to possess this gift, but her reputation in the paranormal community was well established. Mia had the ability to connect with energies that were invisible to most, and her presence was one that made others uncomfortable. She often spoke in whispers, as if not wanting to disturb the very air around her. The team, though diverse in their beliefs and methods, shared one common goal: to investigate the truth behind the Hollow Creek house and its mysterious, unsettling frequency. As the team approached the mansion on the evening of the investigation, the house seemed to watch them. The towering structure stood alone against the dark sky, its broken windows staring like empty eyes, and the overgrown ivy that clung to its sides whispered in the wind like the voices of the forgotten. The oppressive energy that surrounded the house seemed to grow as they neared. It wasn't just the house. It was the land itself. The air felt thick, as if it had been poisoned by the countless years of suffering that had occurred there. Every step toward the front door felt like a step into the unknown, a step closer to something that none of them could explain. Inside, the house was a wreck. Dust settled like a blanket over everything, and the wooden floorboards creaked underfoot, protesting against the intrusion. The air was stagnant, filled with the scent of decay and rot, but there was something else, a constant, faint hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls. It wasn't a sound that could be easily pinpointed. It was more like a feeling, an unsettling vibration that seemed to pulse through the room, unnoticed at first but impossible to ignore once it settled into the soul. Ben immediately began setting up his equipment, positioning cameras and sensors throughout the house, while Alex started recording his observations. Sam, with her logical mind, scrutinized every detail, searching for any natural explanation for what they were about to experience. Mia, on the other hand, stood still, her eyes closed, feeling the energy of the house seep into her. It wasn't the house itself that she felt. No, it was something older, something buried deep within the earth, something alive and hungry. They gathered in the living room, their senses tingling with anticipation. The hum seemed louder now, more pronounced. It filled the space, vibrating through their bodies. Mia looked at the others, her face pale and strained. "It's getting stronger," she whispered. "Whatever is here, it's not just waiting, it's aware of us." And that was when they heard it. A whisper, faint at first, barely audible over the hum of the frequency, but unmistakable. It was a voice that came from nowhere, a voice that seemed to come from the very walls of the house, echoing through their minds as much as their ears. "Get out." The words sent a chill through Alex's spine. Sam froze and Ben's hands shook as he adjusted the camera. The room went silent, save for the eerie hum that still seemed to reverberate in their bones. They weren't alone. The team exchanged uneasy glances, each one of them feeling the weight of the words in their chest. This was just the beginning. What they had come here to find would be far more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. And the frequency, whatever it was, had only just begun to make its presence known. Little did they know, the true terror was just starting to unfold. The walls of Hollow Creek House were ancient, heavy with the weight of secrets that had festered for far too long. As the team ventured deeper into the forgotten halls of the house, the heavy stench of decay mingled with the overwhelming sense of dread that clung to every surface. Each room seemed to tell a story, some of which the house was desperate to keep buried. They had only just scratched the surface. Alex, ever the journalist, scoured through piles of old, yellowed papers in the corner of the study, searching for anything that might explain the phenomena they were encountering. The house had been abandoned for decades, but it was clear that something sinister had once happened here. The history of the house was murky, filled with gaps that no one in the town was willing to fill. Rumors swirled about the place, about the people who had once lived there, and those who had disappeared without a trace. The investigation had only just begun, and already the house was revealing its malevolent nature. The history of Hollow Creek House was tied to a darker time in the area's past. The house had originally been constructed at the turn of the 20th century, built atop the remains of an old asylum. It wasn't just any asylum, but one notorious for its unethical treatments that went far beyond the acceptable practices of the time. Patients were subjected to cruel, inhumane procedures, all in the name of science and progress. Electrical shocks, lobotomies, and other barbaric methods were regularly employed on the inhabitants, many of whom were already mentally unstable to begin with. The asylum was eventually shut down after a series of unethical deaths, but the land was never truly cleansed. Instead of being left to rot as a reminder of humanity's darker instincts, the asylum's remains were bulldozed, and Hollow Creek House was erected on top of them. No one, however, seemed to know the full story of the patients, nor of the tragedy that had occurred within those walls. But something about the house had never been quite right. As Alex and the team pored over the sparse historical records they could find, one event began to stand out, an incident that had taken place inside the house many years ago. It had been an exorcism, or at least that's what the records had called it. The event had been documented as an attempt to rid the house of its supernatural presence. However, things had gone terribly wrong. The exorcism had failed. The priest who had conducted the ceremony was never seen again, his body found days later, gruesomely mutilated. The other participants of the ritual, doctors, nurses, and several brave townspeople, were all found dead in strange and violent ways. Some were discovered hanging from the rafters, others sprawled out in various rooms, their faces twisted in horror as if they had witnessed something too monstrous to comprehend. It was clear that something malevolent had been unleashed that day, something that had never left. The failed exorcism had trapped the souls of those who had died in the house, their spirits bound to the walls, unable to escape. Mia, the psychic, had been oddly quiet since their arrival at Hollow Creek House. While the others busied themselves with their investigation, she stood off to the side, her face pale, her eyes unfocused. She had always been sensitive to energies, but this place, it was different. It felt like the house itself was alive, like it was watching them, waiting for them to uncover its secrets. Then it began. At first, it was a whisper, something she could barely make out. Her head snapped toward the hallway where shadows seemed to shift unnaturally. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she felt the chill creep down her spine. She was not alone in the house. She could feel it. Something was with her, lurking just out of sight, watching. "Do you hear that?" Mia's voice was barely audible, as if she was speaking to herself. She turned toward Alex, her face a mask of fear. "A child. I hear a child. It's crying for help." Alex looked at her, unsure of what she meant. "There's no child here, Mia, you know that." But Mia shook her head, her eyes wide with terror. "I hear it. It's coming from the attic. A child is trapped there. I can feel them calling me." The team had been skeptical of Mia's abilities at first, but there was something in her voice now, something that made Alex's heart race with unease. Mia had always been in touch with the supernatural, but this felt different. It wasn't just a vision or a flash of insight. There was something real in her words, something that was tugging at the very fabric of reality. Against his better judgment, Alex agreed to follow her to the attic. The attic was cold, the air thick with dust and the scent of old, forgotten things. As they climbed the creaky stairs, the team could hear the faintest sound, a soft, wailing cry that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It echoed in their ears, growing louder and more insistent as they neared the attic door. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against them, suffocating them. Mia pushed open the attic door with trembling hands. Inside, the space was dark, the only light coming from the flickering torch Ben held. As they stepped inside, the temperature dropped several degrees, their breath visible in the air. "Do you hear it?" Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "The child is here." But there was nothing. No child, no wailing, just the empty, decaying remnants of a room that had been abandoned for years. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut behind them, plunging the room into total darkness. The team's first true encounter with the supernatural had begun. Strange occurrences started to intensify as the investigation continued. At night, when the team tried to sleep, vivid nightmares began to plague their minds. Sam, the skeptic, had never believed in ghosts, but now she found herself waking up in a cold sweat, heart pounding in fear. The house was toying with them, slowly driving them to the edge of their sanity. In one of her nightmares, Sam found herself standing in the middle of the house's decaying hallways. She could hear footsteps behind her, slow, deliberate, dragging their weight across the floor. When she turned to look, there was nothing. Just shadows creeping along the walls. She was not alone. Ben, too, began to feel the effects. His normally analytical mind, which prided itself on reason, began to unravel. The more he set up his equipment, the more he felt a pull, an overwhelming sense of fear, as though something were watching him from every corner, waiting for the right moment to strike. But it was Mia who suffered the most. As the psychic, she was the most sensitive to the house's energies, and it was clear that the spirits within were not pleased with the team's presence. Mia started to have vivid visions, flashes of the past that seemed to come to life before her eyes. She saw the souls of the tortured patients, their faces contorted in pain, reaching out to her, pleading for help. One vision stood out from the rest. A woman in tattered clothing, her eyes hollow and dead, her fingers outstretched, calling out for salvation. "Help me," the woman whispered, her voice low and mournful. "Help me, before it's too late." The words lingered in Mia's mind, gnawing at her. The tension within the house had reached a breaking point. The team, already on edge from the strange occurrences, found themselves being drawn into a deeper, darker mystery. It wasn't just the house that was haunted. It was the land itself, cursed by the tortured souls that still lingered, trapped in an endless cycle of torment. As they continued to uncover the secrets hidden within Hollow Creek House, The team realized that the true horror of this place was far worse than anything they had imagined. The ghosts of the past had never left, and they were hungry. The air was thick with anticipation as the team settled into their positions inside Hollow Creek House. Every inch of the house, every shadowed corner, seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy that none of them could deny any longer. The investigation had shifted from the theoretical to the very real. What they had once considered supernatural folklore was now manifesting in ways they could not explain. Alex stood at the edge of the living room, looking around at the equipment that Ben had carefully set up. Ben's technological tools were a far cry from the simple spirit detectors they'd used in past investigations. Here, in this cursed house, nothing but the most precise instruments could potentially capture the true nature of the haunting they were facing. "I'm setting up the EMF meters here," Ben announced, his voice tense but professional. His eyes darted from the digital screens of his devices to the dark corners of the house. "We'll be monitoring the electromagnetic fields across the entire house. The frequency we're chasing is 0.0 MHz, but we'll see if we can detect any other irregularities." Sam, skeptical as always, leaned against a wall, arms crossed. "You really think measuring electromagnetic fields is going to do anything?" she asked, her voice dripping with doubt. "I've seen this kind of thing done before. Doesn't prove anything." Ben didn't respond, but Mia, who had been silent until now, turned her piercing gaze toward Sam. "Sometimes, it's not about what you can see or touch," she said softly, her voice carrying an otherworldly quality. "It's about what you can feel." The team began setting up cameras and motion sensors in strategic locations throughout the house. They placed infrared devices in every room, ensuring they'd capture any movement, even the faintest shift in the air. Ben made sure to calibrate his EMF meters with precision, a look of intense concentration on his face. "I think we're ready," Alex said, a note of excitement creeping into his voice. "Let's see what we can find." The experiment began quietly. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The house, though oppressive and dark, had settled into an eerie calm. But as the hours wore on, the atmosphere began to shift. It started subtly, flickers of light from the dim lamps they had set up, a creak from the floorboards that no one could attribute to anything physical. Sam's initial doubts had started to fade, replaced by a creeping sense of unease. She glanced nervously at the monitors Ben was watching. "Something's off," she muttered. Ben, looking at the data on his screens, nodded grimly. "I'm picking up fluctuating readings. They're not consistent, but there's something here. Look." He pointed at the EMF meter on the table. The needle was swinging wildly, higher than it should have been. "Could just be a glitch," Sam remarked, though her voice lacked conviction. Mia stepped forward, her face pale and tense. She closed her eyes, trying to connect with the energies swirling around them. "It's not a glitch," she whispered. "There's something here, something angry. The frequency, it's a signal calling to something." As she spoke, the temperature in the room dropped sharply and Ben's equipment let out a low, electronic whine. Mia's breath, visible in the cold air, began to quicken. Her eyes snapped open, wide with terror. "It's here," she gasped. "The entity, it's feeding off the frequency. It's using the energy to grow stronger." The team stood frozen, their minds struggling to process what Mia had just revealed. "What do you mean, feeding off the frequency?" Alex asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Mia looked around, her gaze unfocused, as if she were looking beyond the physical walls of the house. "The frequency, it's tied to the house. It's the curse. It's been there for years, waiting for someone to uncover it, but now it's awake and it's pulling everything into itself, trapping souls, feeding on them. She paused, her face contorting with fear. And it won't stop until we're all part of it. The air grew heavier, thick with dread. Alex's heart pounded in his chest as he exchanged a look with Sam. This wasn't a game anymore. This wasn't just about investigating strange noises. They were in the presence of something far more dangerous. As if to emphasize Mia's words, a loud bang echoed through the house, followed by a deep rumbling noise. The lights above them flickered violently, casting eerie shadows across the walls. A door slammed shut somewhere in the house, echoing through the halls. The temperature dropped further. The team could feel the chill seeping into their bones and their breath clouded in the freezing air. But it wasn't just the cold that unnerved them. It was the overwhelming sense of something watching them. The walls seemed to press in closer, the air thick with a malignant presence that made it hard to breathe. "We need to move," Ben said, his voice suddenly shaky. "This is way beyond what we expected. I don't think we're safe here anymore." But before anyone could react, a loud crash came from the far end of the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps dragging slowly across the floor. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped directly outside the room where the team had gathered. Then all at once the door flew open, slamming into the wall with such force that the entire room reverberated. The team froze, their hearts in their throats. Standing in the doorway was a figure, pale, emaciated, with long, tangled hair that hung in front of its face. Its eyes were black voids, endless and empty, and its mouth was stretched in an unnatural grin. "Help me," the figure whispered in a voice that sounded like it came from the deepest pit of the earth. The words were barely audible, but they reverberated in their minds, cold and piercing. Mia gasped, stumbling back. "It's one of them," she whispered, her voice shaking with horror. "One of the souls trapped here. It's been waiting for us." Alex tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He could feel the thing's presence in the room now, the weight of its sorrow, its rage, and its hunger. It was no longer just a ghost. It was a part of the house, bound to the cursed frequency. The creature stepped forward, its eyes fixed on Alex, its grin widening as it reached out toward him with bony fingers. The air crackled with energy, and the room seemed to tremble as if the house itself were alive, responding to the presence of the spirit. The team scrambled backward, terrified, as the entity's fingers brushed Alex's arm. Cold shock radiated through him as if the very touch of the thing drained the warmth from his body. His vision blurred and he stumbled, feeling as though his very soul was being pulled from his body. "Alex!" Sam screamed, rushing to his side. But before anyone could react, the entity vanished into thin air, leaving nothing behind but the overwhelming sense of dread that now lingered in the room. Ben, panting, looked at his equipment. "The frequency's spiking," he said, his voice hoarse with fear. "Whatever that was, it's not done yet. This is only the beginning." The team stood in the darkness, shaken and terrified, realizing that they had only just uncovered the tip of the iceberg. The house was alive, and its curse was more insidious than they had ever imagined. And as they continued their investigation, they would discover that the worst was yet to come. The frequency was not just a signal, it was the house's heart, pulsing with malevolent intent. And the team was now part of the dark experiment. The cold, oppressive silence in the house was broken only by the creaking of the floorboards beneath their feet. The air was thick with dread, as if every breath they took was being watched, measured, and weighed by some unseen force. Hollow Creek House had become more than just a place of investigation. It was a living, breathing nightmare. The house itself seemed to pulse with an ancient, malevolent energy, feeding off their fear, drawing them deeper into its insidious embrace. The team had arrived here seeking answers, but now, as the walls seemed to close in around them, they realized that the answers they sought were nothing short of horrifying. Possession and paranoia. It started subtly, as things often do in a house like this, unseen, creeping into the cracks of their minds. Ben, the tech expert, had always been the rational one, the skeptic, but even his sharp mind couldn't deny the strange occurrences that had intensified over the past few hours. At first, he dismissed them, flickering lights, strange noises, the faintest of whispers, but soon even Ben could feel the weight of the house pressing down on them. It was Alex who first noticed something was off with Sam. She had been standing by the window, her back turned to the others, gazing out into the darkened yard. Her body was still, too still, as if locked in a trance. At first, Alex thought she was simply lost in thought, but when she turned to face him, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Her eyes, wide, unblinking, and empty, locked onto his. And for a moment, it was as if she wasn't even there. It was as if someone or something else had taken over her body. "Sam!" Alex's voice trembled. He took a step forward, but she remained perfectly still. Without warning, Sam's head jerked to one side, her neck snapping at an unnatural angle. A deep, guttural growl escaped her throat. It was not her voice. The sound was harsh, distorted, alien. "Leave," the voice hissed. "Leave while you can. You're not meant to be here. You belong to me now." The team froze, horror spreading across their faces. Ben rushed forward, his hands shaking as he reached for his equipment. This can't be happening. But it was. Sam's body began to twist and contort, moving in ways that defied all logic, her spine bending backward as if the bones inside her body were being reshaped by an unseen force. Her hands clawed at the air, as though trying to grasp something invisible, something that only she could see. "No," Mia whispered, her voice shaking. "This is it. The house is taking her. It's using the frequency. It's pulling her in." Alex could barely process what was happening. He stepped back, his mind racing. "We have to help her. We have to," but Mia cut him off. "We can't help her, not while this is happening. The entity inside this house is ancient, it's powerful. It's using Sam to drag us down one by one." Mia stepped closer to Sam, her face pale with fear but resolute. "Sam, listen to me. You have to fight it. You're stronger than this." But Sam's body only convulsed harder, her mouth opening in an unnatural grin. "You're all next." The voice croaked, its tone low and menacing, as if mocking their helplessness. The temperature in the room plummeted, a chilling breeze blowing through the walls. The lights above them flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The house was alive, and it was feeding on their fear. Alex's heart raced as he grabbed Sam by the shoulders, trying to steady her, but it was no use. Her body jerked and twitched violently as if being yanked by invisible strings. "Sam, no!" he cried, his voice desperate, but she didn't respond. Instead, the voice spoke again, this time more clearly, more powerfully. "You're all trapped here. This house belongs to me, and soon you will too." Mia's struggle. Mia had always been sensitive to the energies around her, but this was something far beyond anything she had ever encountered. As the psychic of the group, she had felt the pull of the house from the moment they arrived, but now it was more intense. It wasn't just the house that was haunted, it was the frequency itself. It had become a conduit for something far darker, an ancient force that fed on the souls of the living, trapping them in an endless cycle of torment. As Sam writhed in front of them, Mia felt the tug of the spirits, their cries reverberating in her mind. She could hear them, see them, shadows in the corners of the room, their faces twisted in agony. Some were transparent, their forms flickering in and out of existence, while others were solid, their eyes hollow with unrelenting sorrow. She saw them now, patients from the asylum that once stood here. Their faces were gaunt, their skin stretched tight over bones. Some were still shackled, as though they had never been freed from the horrors they had endured. Their mouths opened in silent screams, their hands outstretched toward her, pleading for help, for release from their prison. The spirits weren't just angry, they were desperate. They were trapped, bound to this house by the frequency, unable to move on. And now Mia realized, the entity that controlled the house had found a way to use them. The frequency was no longer just a signal. It was a trap, a force that drew the spirits in and used them as pawns, feeding on their rage and torment. Mia closed her eyes, trying to block out the vision, but the images persisted, stronger now, more vivid. She could feel their anguish seeping into her soul, their desperate cries gnawing at the edges of her consciousness. It was then that she saw it, a figure standing in the doorway, its presence overwhelming and suffocating. The figure was tall, cloaked in shadow, its face hidden behind a mask of darkness. But Mia could feel its eyes, cold, empty, and filled with malice. This was the entity, the force that had created the curse, the force that fed off the souls trapped within these walls. "Leave," it whispered, its voice a low, menacing hum that vibrated through Mia's chest. "You cannot fight me. I am eternal. I am everything." Dangerous discoveries. As the team struggled to contain the growing chaos, they uncovered something that made their blood run cold. The frequency, the very force that had drawn them into the house, was tied to the entity that controlled it. The house had become a living conduit, amplifying the entity's power and feeding it with the souls it captured. The spirits were not just victims, they were part of the entity's power, and once you entered its grasp, there was no escape. "We're not just investigating a haunted house," Alex muttered, his voice breaking with realization. "We're dealing with something ancient, something that's been feeding off souls for centuries." The team had come to Hollow Creek House to uncover the truth, but now they were part of something far worse than they could have ever imagined. As Ben checked his equipment, his eyes widened in horror. "It's worse than we thought. The readings, they're spiking. The frequency is getting stronger." The lights flickered, and the house groaned as if it were alive, aware of their presence. The walls seemed to close in on them, the air thick with the stench of decay and the oppressive weight of the spirits that were now reaching out for them. The team could hear whispers again, soft at first but growing louder, more urgent. The spirits were closing in, and they were no longer content to remain hidden. One by one, the team members began to hear the whispers in their own minds. They began to see visions, terrifying, violent visions of death. Faces of the dead, twisted in pain, staring at them with hollow eyes. The visions grew more vivid, more real, until it felt as though the spirits were standing right beside them, their cold breath on the back of their necks. The frequency had awoken something far darker, and it was using them, pulling them into its web of torment. Mia screamed as the visions became too much to bear. She collapsed to the floor, clutching her head as the spirits swarmed around her, their tortured faces pressing against her mind. "No!" she cried out, trying to block them out, but they were too powerful, too many. "We have to leave," Sam said, her voice barely a whisper, but the team knew it was too late. The house wasn't going to let them go. In that moment, the full scope of their nightmare became clear. The entity had been waiting for them. It had drawn them here, lured them in with the promise of uncovering its secrets, only to trap them in its grasp. The team had come to uncover the truth, but now they were part of the story, and there was no way out. The house, its frequency, and its dark energy had claimed them, and they were about to learn that there was no escaping the ghosts of the past. The house seemed to breathe around them, its creaking floorboards echoing like a heartbeat, slow and heavy. The air had turned thick and suffocating, almost as though the very walls themselves were alive, watching, waiting. Hollow Creek House was no longer just a place of investigation. It had become something darker, a prison for the team, a place where every step, every breath pulled them deeper into its nightmare. And they were all too aware now that it was no accident they had been drawn here. The house had wanted them, needed them. The call to darkness. Mia's once calm demeanor had shattered. She had always known something was wrong with the house, but now, in the midst of their suffering, she could feel it, the entity rising in power. It was not merely a spirit or a force of nature. It was something ancient, something that had existed long before the house itself had been built. Hollow Creek House was not just its home, it was its vessel, its conduit to the living world. The 0.0 MHz frequency wasn't just some random anomaly. It was the pulse of the house, the heartbeat of the demon that dwelled within it. The frequency had called them, and now it was calling them into darkness. Mia stood in the center of the room, her eyes wide, her breathing shallow. Her skin had gone pale, her hands trembling. The weight of the house's power pressed down on her like a vice. The others stood nearby, equally shaken, but none of them fully understood the scope of what they were dealing with, not yet. "It's going to take us all," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The house, it's preparing to claim us. This frequency, it's not just a signal. It's a portal, a gateway, and it's calling the dead, pulling them here." Alex, his face drawn and tense, stepped forward. "What do you mean pulling them here? The dead? What are you talking about?" Mia closed her eyes, her hand clutching her chest as if trying to steady her frantic heartbeat. "The dead are already here. The frequency calls them, brings them back. It's not just trapping their souls, it's using them, controlling them. And now—" She swallowed hard. "Now it wants us, our souls, it wants to feed." Ben, who had remained mostly silent, stared at the glowing readout on his EMF meter. It was erratic, fluctuating wildly, responding to something unseen, something terrible. He looked up at Mia, disbelief written on his face. "So you're saying we're not just dealing with ghosts here? This is a demon?" Mia nodded, her eyes haunted. "Worse, it's something older. Something that's been here long before the house, before the asylum. This house was built on its ground, on its power, and now it's feeding off us, off our fear. The frequency is what gives it power, and the more we stay, the stronger it gets." The room seemed to contract around them, the walls pressing inward, their breaths growing shallow. Alex could feel the pull of the house as if it were drawing the very air from his lungs. The suffocating energy of the place gnawed at him, clinging to his mind, whispering things he didn't want to hear. "We need to leave," Sam said, her voice thick with fear. "We need to get out of here now." Alex turned to her, shaking his head. "I don't think we can. It's too late. It's too strong." Breaking point. Night fell quickly in Hollow Creek House, as it always did. The shadows grew longer, more oppressive, as the house seemed to breathe deeper, each exhale heavier than the last. It felt like time was slipping away, stretching, bending, as if the house itself were bending reality to its will. The team had already been there for hours, but it felt like days. The weight of the house, of the entity, was starting to tear at their nerves. By now, the tension among the group was unbearable. Mia's warnings had only heightened their sense of danger, and while she may have known the truth, the rest of the team was still trying to wrap their heads around what was happening. Fear began to fester inside them like an infection, eating away at their thoughts, making them paranoid, distrustful. They had come together as a team, united by a common goal. Now that unity was unraveling. Sam and Ben were the first to argue. "This is ridiculous," Sam shouted, her voice filled with frustration. "We've been here for hours and nothing has happened. All we're doing is sitting around and freaking each other out." Ben, who had been obsessively watching the readings on his equipment, turned sharply. "You don't understand. It's not nothing. You don't feel it. The frequency, it's alive. This house, it's a trap. It's drawing us in and it's getting stronger the longer we stay. You can't just walk out. We're already too far gone." Sam threw up her hands, her face flushed with anger. "No, this is insane. We're not being pulled in by anything, Ben. There's no demon. This is just fear. Our minds playing tricks on us." Mia's voice cut through the tension, her words slow, deliberate. "It's not tricks, it's real. The demon feeds on your fear. The house amplifies it, twists it. The more you resist, the worse it gets." The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on them. The whispers had started again, low, distant voices that seemed to come from every corner. Each member of the team began hearing them, even if they refused to acknowledge them. "I hear it too," Alex muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything that could explain the growing sensation of dread. It's in our heads, but it's not. It's real." Ben's hands shook as he adjusted the settings on his equipment. "The readings are off the charts. Whatever is here, it's feeding off us, our fear, our paranoia. The frequency is amplifying it." The whispers grew louder. "Help me." One voice said, "Get out." Another cried, barely audible. "Shut up." Sam screamed, her hands covering her ears. She dropped to her knees, her body trembling. "Stop it, just stop it." But it wouldn't stop. The more they resisted, the stronger it became. The walls of the house seemed to close in on them, and the temperature dropped even further. The house was suffocating them, the demon's power. As the hours stretched on, the psychological strain began to take its toll on the team. Their minds, fragile as they were, couldn't withstand the onslaught of terror and paranoia that the house seemed to instill in them. Each whisper, each movement in the shadows, every flicker of light chipped away at their sanity. No one was immune. Ben, the tech expert, was the first to crack. His hands trembled as he adjusted his instruments, his eyes wide with terror. "I can't do this anymore," he muttered. We're not alone. It's here, it's real. The frequency, it's not just a signal, it's calling it here. The demon, it's not just a spirit, it's a force." Mia's face twisted with fear as she saw the truth dawning in Ben's eyes. She felt it too. An ancient, malevolent presence, something that had always been there, waiting. The entity that controlled Hollow Creek House wasn't just a ghost. It was an ancient demon, a being that had existed long before the house had even been built. It had fed off the spirits trapped in the house for centuries, and now it was feeding on the team's fear, slowly breaking them down, turning them against each other. One by one, the team began to crack. Sam, who had been the most skeptical, began hearing voices, horrifying visions flashing in her mind. The demon used the frequency to show her the deaths of the asylum patients, their twisted, mangled bodies trapped in the walls of the house, begging for release. But it wasn't just Sam. Alex had started seeing visions of his own. His mind, already fragile from the strain of the investigation, began to warp under the influence of the house. He saw his family, his mother, his brother, twisted, their faces pale, their eyes hollow, reaching out to him from beyond the grave. And still the whispers persisted. "You can't leave, you're already ours." The demon had them all now. It had torn through their minds, broken their spirits, and they were all too weak to resist. The frequency pulsed louder, feeding the entity's power. As the team descended deeper into madness, they realized something terrible. The demon had already won. They were no longer simply investigating a haunted house. They had become part of its dark history. They were now trapped in a nightmare of their own making, and the house's call to darkness would never let them go. The house was suffocating them. Each room seemed to close in tighter with every passing moment. The walls groaned under the weight of something ancient, something alive, its pulse steady and cold, reverberating through their bones. Hollow Creek House had become more than just a house, it was a living nightmare. They could feel the entity growing stronger, feeding off their fear, tightening its grip on their minds and souls. They had no choice now. They had to confront it, face the demon head-on. But they knew the cost. The ritual they had uncovered, the ritual that could sever the demon's link to the house and the frequency that had bound it for centuries, would not come without a price. The price would be their courage, their very souls, and the cost of one life. The group, once united in their quest for answers, had become fractured, their nerves frayed, their minds fragile from the horrors they had faced. But they had no other choice. They couldn't leave, not after everything they had learned. They had to finish what they had started. The ritual of binding. Mia, standing at the heart of the room, closed her eyes and took a slow, shuddering breath. Her once confident psychic abilities were now a flickering light in the darkness, her strength nearly drained by the unrelenting energy of the house. But the ritual, the only way to break free from this hell, required everything she had left. She had to summon every ounce of power within her to fight the demon that had claimed this place, to expel it from their lives for good. The team had found the ritual in one of the old, forbidden books buried deep in the mansion's library. The text had been faded, barely legible, but they understood the essence of it. The demon could be banished, severed from the frequency, by performing a binding ritual that would destroy its link to the living world. But the ritual wasn't simple. The binding required immense focus and power. It would require a psychic conduit, someone capable of channeling the house's cursed energy, and a powerful offering of spirit and flesh. Mia had agreed to perform the ritual, but she knew the dangers. She had already felt the demon's touch. She knew that if they failed, if the entity managed to escape the ritual's grip, they would all be lost. "Mia, are you sure?" Alex's voice was rough with fear, his face drawn and pale in the dim light. He stood a few feet away, his hand gripping a strange, ritualistic dagger, the blade gleaming ominously. The components of the ritual lay scattered around the room, candles, herbs, strange symbols drawn in chalk, and ancient stones marked with esoteric runes. "I'm sure," Mia whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing hum in the room. She could feel it, the demon's hunger, its waiting just beyond the veil pressing against her. "But I need your help. I can't do this alone." The team gathered around her, positioning themselves at the four corners of the room, each of them holding a piece of the ritual that Mia had explained to them. They were prepared, but their readiness was laced with dread. Every inch of their bodies was attuned to the presence of the demon, to the evil that pulsed within the walls of the house. Mia's hands shook as she held the ancient tome, whispering the incantations from the forgotten language. Her breath was ragged as the air around her began to ripple with power. The frequency in the room spiked, a low hum filling the space, vibrating through her chest. The air grew colder, denser, and the team could feel the pressure of it, as though the house itself was fighting against them, trying to resist their efforts. "Concentrate," Mia murmured, her eyes flashing open, glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. "Focus on the demon's presence. Draw it to us." The ritual had begun, the final confrontation. The ground beneath their feet trembled, the walls groaning as if the house itself were alive, twisting and shifting in response to the incantations. The demon fought back with everything it had, its ferocity growing with every word Mia uttered. It was using the house, manipulating the frequency to increase its power, to distort reality. The house warped around them, its once familiar rooms distorting into nightmare landscapes. The walls pulsed, breathing, alive with dark energy. One by one, the team began to experience horrors beyond comprehension. Alex's vision blurred, and suddenly the room around him twisted, the walls stretching and closing in, suffocating him. He gasped for air, but the pressure in the room made it impossible to breathe. Figures appeared in the shadows, patients from the asylum, their hollow eyes staring at him, their faces twisted in eternal agony. They reached out to him, their fingers cold as ice, their mouths opening in silent screams. Sam was next. She screamed as she fell to her knees, clutching her head as visions of death flooded her mind. The demon had found her weakness, exploiting her deep-seated fears. She saw herself trapped in the house forever, her body decaying as the walls closed in on her, never allowing her to escape. The fear, the suffocating terror, overwhelmed her. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. "Get out!" The whispers rang in her ears, louder now, more insistent. She fought to stay grounded, to hold on to the reality she knew, but it was slipping away, pulled from her like a fading memory. Ben, too, was not immune. His hands trembled as he held his equipment, trying to maintain control over the monitors. But the frequencies were too much. The lights above them flickered wildly, casting long, grotesque shadows across the room. The walls began to crack, revealing glimpses of the dark world beyond. He could see the entity now, its shape shifting in the darkness, its presence looming like a black storm cloud, suffocating everything in its path. And through it all, Mia chanted. She poured her energy into the ritual, her body trembling, her voice breaking under the strain. Her mind was slipping too, her connection to the house growing stronger, more dangerous. But she had no choice. The ritual had to succeed. They couldn't let the demon win. But the house wasn't done with them. A life lost. As the ritual reached its peak, something snapped. The demon, enraged by their defiance, broke free from the constraints they had tried to impose. The energy in the room exploded, the force of it knocking everyone off their feet. The lights shattered and the room was plunged into darkness, the only sound the deafening hum of the demon's presence, now fully unleashed. In the chaos, someone screamed. It was Sam. Her voice was raw with terror, her body writhing as the demon made its final, violent strike. She had been standing by Mia, holding her part of the ritual when the demon, sensing its moment of victory, reached out and grabbed her. The house trembled as the walls seemed to close in, and in that instant Sam was pulled toward the center of the room. Her body twisted unnaturally, her spine bending in ways that should not have been possible. A final, heart-wrenching scream echoed through the house as Sam's body was taken, her spirit ripped from her form and devoured by the entity. Her body fell to the floor with a sickening thud. Mia's scream was the loudest of all, but it was too late. Sam was gone. The team had lost one of their own and the ritual had failed. The demon had taken its first victim. The aftermath. The room fell silent as the dust settled, the echoes of the attack still reverberating in their minds. The house, once alive with the energy of the demon, now seemed almost peaceful, a deceptive calm settling over it. But the team knew better. The demon was still there. It was only getting stronger. Mia, gasping for breath, staggered back to her feet, her face pale, her body shaking. Her hands trembled as she clutched the ancient book to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She had failed. She had failed them all. Alex, Ben, and Sam's lifeless body were all that remained in the wake of the destruction. The demon had claimed its prize, but the battle was far from over. The frequency, the demon, had already begun to grow again, and the house, hungry for more souls, was waiting for its next victim. And so the team was left with nothing but their shattered souls, their minds broken, and the horrifying knowledge that the demon's reign of terror was far from over. They had come here seeking answers, but they had found nothing but death, destruction, and a hunger that could never be sated. The demon had called them into its darkness, and now there was no escape. The air in Hollow Creek House had grown thick with an unnatural stillness. A sense of finality hung over the room, heavy and suffocating. The team, fractured and broken, had faced horrors beyond comprehension. They had been to the very edge of their sanity, and in some cases beyond. Sam's death still weighed heavily on them, a constant reminder of how deeply the demon had sunk its claws into their lives. But the worst was yet to come. What they had unleashed with their failed ritual, the barrier between the living and the dead, was now slipping, and the spirits once trapped in the ether of the house were awakening. The spirits awaken. It began slowly, almost imperceptibly. A soft whisper that drifted through the room like a wind through the cracks in the walls. At first, it was nothing more than the faintest of sounds, a shiver in the air, a brush against the skin. But then, the air began to shift, with a heaviness that made it impossible to breathe. Mia was the first to sense it. She had felt the presence of the spirits long before, but now it was different. The energy was violent, hungry. Her body trembled as she closed her eyes, trying to block out the onslaught of images that flooded her mind. The spirits were no longer passive observers, they were angry. Their souls, once trapped by the demon, now had freedom. The barrier that had held them at bay had cracked, and they were rising, eager for revenge. She gasped, clutching her head as a vision hit her like a wave, a flash of grotesque, decayed faces pressing against her mind. Their eyes were hollow, their bodies rotting, but there was something far more disturbing than their appearance: the rage. The anger that had built up in them over centuries of suffering, helpless and trapped, now had a target. They had been denied peace, and they would not let anyone pass through the house without feeling their fury. "They're waking up," Mia whispered, her voice ragged. "They are here, they want vengeance." Ben looked at her, his face pale with fear. He couldn't see them, not as Mia could, but he could feel the shift in the air. The temperature dropped sharply, the chill sinking deep into his bones. The walls creaked, the floorboards groaning under some unseen weight, as if the house itself was stirring from a long slumber. And then it happened. The whisper turned into a roar. A sudden crash of sound erupted from the walls as the spirits, the damned, ripped through the house, their forms twisting and writhing, their screams filling the room. The walls shook, the house groaned, and the very foundation of Hollow Creek seemed to crack under the force of their return. The team recoiled in terror as figures began to emerge from the shadows. their forms twisting and decaying as they shuffled forward, their hollow eyes locked on the living. The stench of rot filled the room, and the air grew thick with their presence. They were not the peaceful spirits they had once believed. They were not lost souls seeking redemption. They were furious. They were monsters born from suffering, hunger, and anger. "Get back!" Alex shouted as one of the spirits lunged at him, its long, bony fingers reaching for his throat. The thing was horrific, its skin hanging loosely from its bones, its mouth stretching open impossibly wide as if it had been screaming for centuries. It was the spirit of a patient from the asylum, a soul twisted by the demon's influence into something monstrous. Ben raised his equipment, a desperate attempt to get a read on the supernatural force that was now attacking them. But it was useless. The spirits were not responding to technology, to logic. They were responding to rage. The team scattered, trying to avoid the spirits that closed in around them. But for every step they took to get away, the spirits were there, closer, faster, survival mode. Panic set in as the team struggled to process what they were facing. They had dealt with ghosts before, had seen supernatural manifestations, but this was something else entirely. These spirits weren't just manifestations of sorrow or confusion. They were angry. They were seeking revenge. "Stay together," Alex shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. "We need to get to the basement. That's the safest place. It's where we can regroup." But the house wasn't going to make it easy for them. The walls seemed to shift, the floorboards warping underfoot as though the house itself was alive, twisting and closing in, funneling them toward the spirits that were hunting them. Mia, her mind still reeling from the visions, clutched her head. She could see it now, the true horror of the demon's grip on the house. The spirits that had been trapped here for so long, the patients from the asylum, were not just victims. They were vessels of the demon's anger, kept alive through their suffering and resentment. They had been waiting for the moment when the barrier between the living and the dead would break, when the house's power would rise again. And now that moment had come. The team, already on the edge of their sanity, was being pushed to the brink. The spirits were no longer just a threat. They were their worst nightmares made real. Ben swore under his breath, his hands shaking as he pulled out a flare gun from his backpack. "We need to fight back. We can't let them drag us into the dark with them." But even as he spoke, the spirits advanced, their faces twisted with hatred. One by one, they seemed to pick their targets. Ben raised the flare gun and fired, the bright light flashing through the room, blinding them all for a split second. But the light only seemed to anger the spirits further. One spirit, a twisted figure with hollowed eyes and a mouth filled with jagged, broken teeth, lunged at Ben. He barely had time to react before the thing was on him, its hands cold and slimy, clawing at his chest. The demon's power had made them strong, stronger than the living. They were not mere ghosts. They were monsters. Mia, struggling to keep her focus, felt her psychic powers flare up in response to the spirit's rage. She reached out, her hands trembling as she tried to push the spirits back. But their strength overwhelmed her. Her visions became a blur of faces, thousands of faces, all screaming, all begging for release. The house was alive with the souls of the damned, each one trapped in this endless loop of vengeance. "Let us go," Mia screamed, her voice echoing through the walls, but the house didn't answer. It only fed. The team fought desperately, using every tool at their disposal, flares, salt, knives, and even their bare hands, anything to keep the spirits at bay. But each time they struck a blow, the spirits multiplied. For every one they pushed back, another seemed to rise in its place. They couldn't keep up. They couldn't win. The truth unveiled. In the midst of the chaos, something shifted in Alex's mind. He had been running, fighting, trying to escape, but now he saw it clearly. The house had never been a sanctuary for the living. It had always been a trap, a prison built to house the souls of the damned, bound by the frequency, bound by the entity that had created them. These spirits weren't just trapped, they were created. The entity had been feeding off them for centuries, using them as its pawns. The spirits, once mere victims of the asylum's horrors, had become part of the house's darkness, vessels for the entity's rage and hunger. And now they were no longer just victims. They were agents of destruction. The truth was undeniable. The only way to survive was to understand the house, to understand its history, to understand the demon's origins. But how could they break free when the house itself was determined to drag them down into the same fate as those poor souls trapped within it? The spirits, in their vengeful frenzy, had become more than just apparitions. They were the very embodiment of the house's curse. The team was facing not just an entity, but an entire legacy of suffering and vengeance that stretched back for centuries. And now, they were part of it. The team's hope began to fade as they fought to hold their ground, but each attack, each act of defiance only seemed to bring the spirits closer. The walls seemed to pulse with their power, feeding off their fear. They had entered the house seeking answers. But now they realized with chilling clarity they were the answer. They were the next victims, the next souls trapped in the house for eternity. And the spirits, the damned, would make sure they never left. The walls of Hollow Creek House were alive. Every sound, every creak and groan of the structure seemed to come from the very heart of the house itself. The floorboards pulsed under their feet, as if the house were breathing, its vast, decaying lungs working in rhythm with their every movement. The temperature had dropped even further, the cold creeping into their bones and lodging there, suffocating them with its icy grip. Every breath they took felt heavier, more labored, as if the air was being squeezed out of them by some invisible force. Alex stood at the center of the room, his eyes darting frantically from one corner of the house to another. It felt as though the house was watching them, its presence pressed down on them, pushing them closer to the edge of their sanity. Their time had run out. They had been here too long, and the demon's hold on them had become undeniable. Mia's face was pale, her body trembling as she tried to focus on the energy swirling around her. She could feel it now, the demon, its malevolent energy wrapping around them like an inescapable net. They were trapped, but not in the way they had thought. Hollow Creek House was no longer just a physical space. It had become a living entity, a sentient being with a mind of its own. "This place," Mia whispered, her voice trembling with terror, "it's feeding on us. It's not just the demon anymore. The house. It's alive." Ben, his face twisted in fear, looked at the monitors, his hands shaking as he adjusted the settings on his equipment. "It's manipulating us. The walls, the floors, they are moving. The house is changing to keep us here. We can't get out." Alex's heart sank. The walls of the house had already shifted before, warping around them, trapping them in rooms that hadn't been there moments before. Doors that once opened freely now slammed shut, as though the house itself were fighting to keep them inside. They had to find a way out, and fast. Escape plan, panic gripped them all. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was survival. The very ground beneath their feet felt unstable, as if the house was shifting its foundation, preparing to collapse and bury them all. There was no time to waste. They had to escape, but escape from what? A haunted house, or a living, breathing force that had become their prison. "We need to find the way out," Alex said, his voice tight with urgency. Now, Mia, despite the terror gripping her, began scanning the walls, her eyes narrowed in concentration. She could feel the vibrations of the house, the pulse of the demon's influence, but there was something else beneath it, something hidden, a shift, a change in the energy. "There's a way out," she said, her voice low but resolute. "But it's hidden. The house doesn't want us to find it." The others gathered around her, their eyes filled with desperation. They had no choice but to trust her. Mia closed her eyes, reaching out with her psychic abilities. She felt the heartbeat of the house, the dark, malignant rhythm that throbbed beneath the walls, beneath the very ground they stood on. The demon's power was all-encompassing, but there was a pulse of something else, a faint light in the darkness, a secret passage, a hidden escape. "It's this way," Mia said, pointing to the far corner of the room, where the shadows were particularly deep. She stepped forward, her footsteps tentative but determined. "Follow me." The team moved quickly, their hearts pounding in their chests as they followed her lead. The air felt colder the closer they got, the weight of the house's power pressing in on them from all sides. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows growing longer, darker. Suddenly, Mia stopped. Her eyes widened with horror as she stared at the floor beneath her. There, just barely visible, was a faint outline of a door, an old, weathered passageway that hadn't been there moments before. The house had hidden it from them, but Mia had found it. "This is it," Mia whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is the only way out." But even as they rushed toward the door, they could feel the house fighting back. The floor beneath their feet began to vibrate, the walls shaking violently as the demon's rage flared. The door creaked open, but the darkness beyond was like a void, a never-ending abyss. "It's not going to let us go," Ben said, his voice tight with panic. The walls around them began to shift, the air growing thick with the demon's power. The temperature plummeted even further, and the team could hear the sound of something crawling beneath the floorboards, scratching, clawing, coming for them. Ultimate sacrifice. They had no time to hesitate. Mia, her face pale and drawn, looked back at the others. "We have to move now," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. "We're running out of time." The team rushed into the passageway, the door slamming shut behind them with a deafening bang. The passage was narrow, winding, and dark, but it seemed to stretch on forever, a narrow tunnel leading them toward freedom. But the house was not done with them. The ground beneath their feet trembled violently, and a low growl echoed through the walls of the passage. The demon's voice, low, guttural, and filled with an insatiable hunger, rose from the depths of the house. "You cannot leave," it whispered. "You belong to me now." The passage seemed to constrict around them, narrowing as if the very walls were closing in. And then it happened. A loud scream echoed through the darkness. Mia, who had been leading them through the tunnel, was suddenly pulled backward. Her body jerked, her arms flailing as an unseen force grabbed hold of her, dragging her into the darkness. "No!" Alex shouted, reaching out for her, but it was too late. Mia was gone, swallowed by the house. Her scream echoed through the passage, and then silence fell. The team stood frozen, their hearts racing in their chests. They had lost Mia, their last hope, and the demon had claimed her as its own. "We can't go back," Ben said, his voice shaking with terror. "We can't leave her behind, we have to keep moving." But they couldn't. They couldn't let the demon win. And so they pressed forward, each of them knowing that they would never forget what had happened. They would carry the memory of Mia's sacrifice with them, a reminder that the house had claimed its toll. But they couldn't stop now, not when they were so close. The tunnel opened into a cavernous room, and ahead of them they could see the faintest glimmer of light, a crack in the stone, a way out. But the house was not finished yet. The walls around them trembled again, and the passage began to collapse, stones falling from above as the house tried to bury them alive. As they leave, the team made a final, desperate sprint toward the light, their hearts pounding in their chests as they emerged into the open air. The ground beneath them was uneven, rocky, but they didn't care. They had made it. They were free. But as they stood outside, breathing in the cool, fresh air, they heard it. A faint sound, soft, distant, drifting from behind them. The faint cries of the spirits still trapped within the house, their souls forever bound to the demon's power. The house, though gone, would never truly be free. The demon's influence would live on, and the spirits of the damned would remain, waiting for the next souls to enter. They had escaped the house, but they had not escaped the consequences. The demon's call would follow them wherever they went, a reminder that the darkness they had encountered could never truly be outrun. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the team knew that their fight was far from over. The house might have been destroyed, but the demon and the souls it had claimed would never rest. They had escaped the house, but the curse would never let them go. The nightmare never truly ended. Even as the team stepped out of Hollow Creek House, their bodies trembling with exhaustion, their minds haunted by the horrors they had witnessed, they knew that the house, the entity, had not finished with them. The house might have crumbled, its walls falling to dust and debris, but the malevolent energy that had long festered within it was not so easily erased. It clung to them, followed them like a shadow, lingering in their thoughts and dreams. Haunted by the past, Alex couldn't sleep. He hadn't been able to sleep properly since that night. His mind raced, replaying every moment they had spent inside that cursed house. He had tried to bury it, to move on, but the images wouldn't leave him. The twisted faces of the spirits, their hollow eyes staring at him, their cold hands reaching for him in the dark. It all came back when he closed his eyes. The terror, the suffocating sense of being trapped in a nightmare that never ended. He could feel the house with him even now. Even though he was miles away, the frequency of Hollow Creek House followed him. He could hear it, faint at first, like the distant hum of an old radio. But when he tried to listen, it would vanish, slipping into the corners of his mind like a fleeting memory. It wasn't just the house he feared anymore. It was the curse, the ancient power that had once claimed the spirits within those walls. That power had been bound but not destroyed, and now it clung to them, tethered to their very souls. Alex sat in the corner of the small, dimly lit apartment he had returned to, the walls closing in around him as the weight of the past pressed against his chest. He looked at the photographs on the table, pictures of happier times before the house, before the horror. It felt like a different lifetime, a lifetime he could never return to. The demon's voice still echoed in his head, "You belong to me now." Those words, whispered in the shadows of the house, had become his own personal nightmare. He had thought when they escaped that he had left it all behind, but he had been wrong. It followed them. It was inside them. Mia, too, was struggling. Unlike Alex, who had at least tried to find some semblance of normalcy, Mia had withdrawn from everything. She spent her days in silence, her eyes darkened with the weight of what had happened. She was the psychic, the one who had felt the entity's power the most, the one who had seen the souls of the damned, and she had felt their wrath. She had seen the things the others couldn't. She had known the truth, that the demon had only been momentarily sealed, but it was not gone. And every time she closed her eyes, she saw its shadow creeping closer. It wasn't just that Mia couldn't escape the haunting images of the house. It was the knowledge that they had only temporarily defeated the demon, that it was still waiting, somewhere out there watching them. She felt it in the air, thick and suffocating, like the walls of her apartment were closing in on her, just as the house had once closed in around them. Every corner seemed to whisper, and every door seemed to lead her back into the darkness. They were all haunted, forever. The demons return. Months passed. The team tried to go on with their lives. They each tried to find a way to move forward, to forget what they had experienced, to forget what had been lost. But it was impossible. Then one night something changed. Mia had been sitting in her apartment, staring at the wall, when the air around her grew cold, too cold. She felt it, the pull of the frequency. It was back. It had never left. She reached for her phone, her hands trembling as she dialed Alex's number. "Alex," she whispered when he picked up. "It's happening again. The frequency. It's back. It's coming for us." "Are you sure?" Alex asked, his voice tight with fear. The line between what was real and what wasn't had blurred in his mind for weeks. He had tried to ignore it, tried to push it out of his thoughts. But the fear was always there, lingering at the edges of his consciousness. The demon was never truly gone. He had known it deep down, but hearing Mia's voice now, breaking through the silence of his own mind, confirmed his worst fears. "I can feel it," Mia said, her voice breaking. "It's here, and it's stronger than before. I'm not sure how much longer we have." The words echoed in Alex's mind as he looked out the window of his apartment. It was as if the world itself had changed again. The night seemed darker, colder, and he could feel the presence of something wrong. The shadows in his apartment seemed to move, creeping closer, and the hum of the frequency, faint but unmistakable, reached his ears. "No," Alex whispered, shaking his head as though trying to clear the thought from his mind. We have to stop it. We have to end this." Mia was right. The demon's power had never been fully sealed. It had only been weakened for now. The house had been destroyed, yes, but the entity had been linked to the very fabric of their lives. It had fed off them, grown stronger with their fear, and now it was returning to claim what it had been denied. "I'll be there," Alex said, hanging up the phone. He grabbed his coat, his heart pounding in his chest as he prepared to face the truth. The truth that they hadn't escaped. They had been marked by the demon. The return of Hollow Creek. They met in a place that felt far removed from the horrors they had faced. But even here in the quiet of the city, they couldn't escape it. Ben, Sam's death still heavy on his heart, sat across from Mia and Alex in a run-down diner. His hands shook as he took a sip of his coffee, his eyes scanning the room nervously. He hadn't spoken to anyone about the horrors they had endured. He had tried to forget it all, but the fear wouldn't let him go. It gnawed at him, reminding him of the things he had seen, the things they had done. Alex and Mia sat across from him, their faces drawn, tired, haunted. They didn't need to say anything. The fear was written in their eyes. "We can't let it win," Alex said, his voice low but filled with determination. "We can't let it take us." "But how?" Ben asked, his voice breaking slightly. "We already tried. We failed." "We didn't fail," Mia replied, her voice quiet but resolute. "We weakened it. We banished it, but it's not gone. It's still here, waiting, and it's coming back stronger than before." The demon had found a way to survive. It had always been there, lurking in the dark, waiting for them to let their guard down. And now it was drawing closer, fueled by their fear, by their guilt, by their memories. It would stop at nothing to claim them, to feed off their souls. But the team had one thing the demon did not. They had each other, and together they would fight. As the last remnants of Hollow Creek House crumbled to dust, the curse, the demon, would not end. It would continue to grow, to seek new victims, to feed on the living and the dead alike. The battle had only just begun, and the fight for their lives and for their souls was far from over. As the wind howled outside, carrying with it the faintest echoes of a voice long dead, the team knew what they had to do. They had to destroy the demon once and for all. But the question remained, could they? Would they ever truly escape the dark grip of Hollow Creek House? Or was this nightmare only the beginning of a far darker, far deeper curse that would follow them forever? The demon's return was not just the return of a house. It was the return of their worst fears, and they had no choice but to face them one last time. In Whispers in the Dark's tale of Hollow Creek House, we journeyed alongside a group of investigators as they uncovered an ancient evil lurking within the walls of a forsaken mansion. The house itself, haunted by vengeful spirits and driven by a malevolent demon, becomes more than just a physical structure. It transforms into a living, breathing entity, thriving on the fear and suffering of those unfortunate enough to cross its path. The team, each struggling with their own personal demons, faces increasingly horrifying events that push them to their limits. They unravel the house's cursed history and attempt to end the torment, only to discover that the evil they face is far older and more powerful than they could have ever imagined. Each attempt to escape leads to loss, sacrifice, and painful realizations about their own humanity. As the story progresses, we see the team's desperate attempts to break free from the grip of Hollow Creek House. Yet, no matter how hard they try, the demon's influence is undeniable, and even when they believe they've finally escaped, they realize that the curse still lingers, following them like a shadow. The spirits of the past, those trapped within the house's walls for eternity, continue to haunt them, reminding them that no matter how far they run, they can never truly escape the darkness that has consumed them. The essence of this story lies in the fight against fear. The house and the demon represent the relentless grip of our worst nightmares, those parts of ourselves that we try to bury, the unresolved trauma, guilt, and insecurities that shape our thoughts and actions. The team was not just battling an external force, but also the darkness within their own minds. The true horror of Hollow Creek House wasn't the supernatural phenomena, but the psychological and emotional toll it took on the team. Their greatest struggle was not against the spirits, but against their own doubts and fears. The most profound lesson from Hollow Creek House is that fear, whether it stems from the past, from external forces, or from our own insecurities, has an incredible power to control and manipulate us. The house symbolized the weight of unresolved trauma and the consequences of running away from our fears. Just like the spirits trapped in the house, we can find ourselves imprisoned by our past mistakes, regrets, and unresolved emotions, unable to move forward. The demon's influence was not just about its physical power, but about how it fed on fear, constantly growing stronger when its victims allowed it to. The more they tried to escape, the tighter its grip became. In life, it's essential to face our fears instead of running from them. Just as the team struggled with their inner demons, we must confront the emotional and psychological burdens that weigh us down. Only by acknowledging these fears, accepting their existence, and dealing with them head-on can we truly begin to heal and move forward. The longer we let them linger, the stronger they grow, and the more they shape our thoughts, decisions, and lives. In our modern world, it's easy to feel like we're being consumed by external pressures. the pressures of work, relationships, or personal failure. But in reality, these pressures often feed on the fears within us. The fear of not being enough, of being judged, or of facing the unknown. We must remember that true strength comes from within. Confronting our inner demons, accepting our flaws, and learning to grow from them is the key to breaking free from the cycles that trap us. What do you think of the story? How do you interpret the message about facing our fears and the consequences of avoiding them? Do you think the characters' struggles reflect challenges we face in our own lives? Share your thoughts and comments below. Let's discuss and learn from each other's perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe to Whispers in the Dark to support our channel. Your support motivates us to create more spine-chilling stories and deep, thought-provoking content that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for being part of this journey into the unknown.